that, I'll turn it over to the chairman.
All right, welcome everybody. I think I know everybody except next to Catherine.
Alexis. I'm with Bloomberg Law.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. I know Noreen's here from Bloomberg also. I know everybody else. Okay. All right, well, good. I've got a sneaking suspicion somebody's going to ask about the EO, so let me just go ahead and get to that. Two main points I want to make. One point is, and I'm going to elaborate on both, probably more than you want to hear, but that's what lawyers do, but I'm going to elaborate on both. First point I want to make is I read this, and I've got the quaint habit of reading stuff before I run my mouth about it. I read this very closely, read it very, very closely. A lot of this in the EO is basically putting in one place past practices that have been going on for years. And let me just give you examples. We already submit our budget to OMB. We've been doing that for years. They can approve it or not approve it. We already submit our strategic plan to OMB, and we've been doing it for years, and they can question it. So that's not new. We already submit major regulations that have economic impacts to what's called OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA. We already do that. We did it in 1920. Go back and look at 1920. There's a little thing in there about OIRA compliance. So that's been going on for quite a while. We have complied with presidential EOs for decades. The CEQ regulations we have voluntarily complied with. They are pursuant to an EO that goes back to the Clinton administration. President Obama had several executive orders, one on ethics that we comply with. I don't know if you all look, you probably should, but I'm not asking for it. But we file an ethics report every year. And we do that because of an EO, executive order, that we comply with. So we've had EOs that we've complied with for decades. In terms of consulting, of course, the chairman's going to consult with the administration. That's been going on for decades. AJ wrote a good story. Where's AJ? AJ wrote a good story, really interesting, about FERC's independence, noting that one of the former chairs, since I got here, Rich Glick, met regularly with the Biden White House with the so-called climate czar, and on a regular basis. And you know what? That was perfectly appropriate. So the consultation part has been going on for years, as of course it should. It's fanciful to think that if a president can appoint a chair, the president is going to appoint a chair who's going to do something 180 degrees opposite of what the general policy of the administration is. I mean, it's ludicrous to think that. So, I mean, and that has never been the case. That's never been the case. Remind you of the last 4 years, President Biden came out with early in his administration with an executive order called Net Zero 2035. You might want to go read it. And it was, by its own description, a, quote, whole of government approach. And it applied to every agency. And every agency had to adopt a strategic plan and move forward on Net Zero 2035. FERC was under the rubric of every agency. So that's not new. The idea that a presidential administration is not going to expect agencies to be consistent with their overall policy, and certainly from in terms of this administration, what do we want at FERC? We want a reliable power grid, and we want to control consumer costs, which is exactly what this administration, the Trump administration, wants. A reliable power grid, get generation built, get energy infrastructure built, control costs to consumers. I've been talking about this for 4 years, perfectly consistent with this administration. So the consultation is, that's not new. All right, so that's the first point. A lot of this stuff is basically taking stuff that was somewhere else and putting it in one place and nothing new. Now, the second point I want to make is there's a lot of detail yet to be known about the parts that aren't obviously what we've been doing. And the question here, and again, I want to get more detail. We're going to ask the appropriate places for more detail and see how this plays out. But we have statutes that govern the many cases that we have. We do over 1,000 cases a year. Our cases arrive, they do arrive here because 99% of them come in the door. We don't start them; they come here. So we have over 1,000 cases. Where do they arise from? First of all, under the Federal Power Act, we have cases that come in under Section 203. Section 203 are the mergers. One utility wants to buy another utility, or a big investment fund asset manager like BlackRock wants to buy a chunk of a utility. They file here under 203. We handle those under the statute. Section 205, the bread and butter of what we do here are like 205 cases. 205 cases come at Section 205, Federal Power Act. They're filed here. We don't start them. They're filed here. And they're handled under that code section. And we have a long history of handling those efficiently. We have to handle them efficiently because we only have 60 days to do it. And so we can't be, obviously, waiting on those. We have to act on those. Section 206 is another part of the Federal Power Act that we handle. Section 219, Federal Power Act. These are when transmission developers come in and they want incentives, what I've called FERC candy, and they come in under Section 219 of the Federal Power Act. All of these are covered by statutes that we follow and will continue to follow. Another part of our bread and butter here, the pipeline cases, the LNG export cases. They come in under either Section 3 of the Natural Gas Act, that would be LNG, or they come in under Section 7 of the Natural Gas Act. These are the pipeline cases. We handle those under our statutes, and we will continue to handle those under our statutes. So there's a bunch of statutes that govern what we do. In addition to the Federal Power Act and Natural Gas Act, there are procedural statutes like the Administrative Procedure Act. We have to follow the APA in every case, and we will continue to do so. In cases where we're going to have to do an environmental impact statement or environmental assessment, we're going to follow the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. So all these statutes, and we have to follow what's called the Sunshine Act. And for example, in all these proceedings under 205, 203, 219, 206, Section 3, Section 7, Natural Gas Act, these are all contested proceedings. And we do not allow ex parte communications. That would violate the Sunshine Act. It would also violate everything I know about due process in contested proceedings going back being a state regulator. We didn't allow it in Virginia either. So we're not going to start allowing ex parte communications because that would violate the Sunshine Act. So the point I'm making is a lot of the detail about how this EO may necessarily impact on the bread and butter cases that we do, we'll seek information and we'll seek clarification. And I don't think that that's the intent. I don't think that OMB wants to weigh in on the over 1,000 cases that we have, that 99% of which we don't initiate. They come in the door. And every one of which the party initiating it, whether it's a utility, whether it's a transmission developer, whether it's an asset manager seeking to buy a chunk of a utility under 203, I don't think the industry wants any of those delayed, and we're going to continue to act quickly and get those out. And so I think it's just a lot of this, I think, is really about the big sweeping, I really think it's about the big sweeping regulations. I'm not going to speak for OMB or the White House, but I'm going to speak about, it's about the big sweeping regulations where a commission or an agency is initiating a really big deal, to use a certain acronym. And I think that's what it's about. But then we don't have that clarification yet. I think that's what it's about, and it should be about, because why would any commission initiate a big sweeping regulation that's contrary to what the presidential administration wants? I mean, and by the way, I can't think of an example in my history of watching administrative law where that's ever happened. I can think of a lot of examples where commissions initiated big sweeping regulations that the White House did want. One example, go back to the Obama administration and net neutrality. That came out of the White House, and the FCC did it. I remember reading all about that. In the past administration, I mentioned the Biden net zero 2035. The GHG policy statement that was initiated on a 3-2 vote at this commission in 2022 was perfectly consistent, came right out of that net zero 2035, and perfectly appropriate. I mean, I dissented on policy grounds, but there was nothing inappropriate about the majority pursuing that GHG policy statement. 1920. 1920 was all about promoting I said it in my dissent, a policy agenda. And it was a policy agenda completely consistent with Biden's net zero 2035. And in my dissent, I brought the receipts. I quoted Catherine. I quoted you probably 5 times. I'm surprised you didn't charge me for royalties. About pointing out from the press coverage that that's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. So nothing inappropriate about it, and nothing inappropriate, nothing nefarious. It's just agencies are going to reflect the presidential administration. I mean, why wouldn't they when the president appoints the chair and the president gets to appoint a majority? So I think where the detail needs to come and where we're going to seek detail is in the bread and butter cases that we have that come in the door. We didn't ask for them. They come in the door, 205s, 206s, 203s. And we got to get detail because I certainly don't think that the intent is that every 205, every 206, we have to go ask somebody else what we do in those cases. And I don't think DOJ wants 1,000 cases where they have to do a legal opinion in every 205, every 206. I don't think they have the resources or the inclination to want to do that. But we'll get clarification. We'll get clarification. But one thing overall I want to say, we have a vital mission. The overall mission at FERC, of course, is to ensure just and reasonable rates under the Federal Power Act, and that is certainly consistent with what this administration said once, which is control consumer costs. It's consistent with what I said for 4 years. We want reliable power. That means we've got to build infrastructure. Clearly, this president wants to build infrastructure. We're the key agency to do that. We're the ones who issue the CPCNs. So everything is perfectly consistent there. So that's the 2 points I want to make. Number one, a lot of what's in the EO, if you read it a lot, and I've read it a lot, Maya sent it to me while I was having a martini Tuesday night, and thank you. Had a second martini, which I was going to do anyway. But I've read it very closely, read it very carefully. I think a lot of what's in there is basically putting in one wrapper practices that we've followed for years, and it's not new. To the extent there's question marks about the details, particularly with our bread and butter cases that we handle over 1,000 a year, we'll get detailed guidance on that. And but at the end of the day, we follow the law. At the end of the day, we follow the law. Federal Power Act, Natural Gas Act, Administrative Procedure Act, Sunshine Act. All of those are applicable. All of those. And oh, by the way, one other thing, and I'll finally shut up. Everybody's probably falling asleep. But the EO has a clause in it. And as a lawyer, I'm always looking for that money clause, right? And it has a clause in it which says nothing in here affects existing law or the authority of any agency under existing law. Okay? So, by its own terms, with that kind of a savings clause, it does not affect our existing authority under all those statutes I mentioned to you. Federal Power Act, Natural Gas Act. It doesn't affect our existing authority under all those statutes. The EO itself says that. I highlighted it. And so I'm going to take it at its word. And then, but the consultation, all the other stuff is perfectly appropriate. It's been going on for years, decades. Okay. All right, with that long talk, we'll go on to questions. Oh, Catherine, go ahead.
Thanks, Chairman, well, first of all, congratulations on your new position, and thank you for taking our questions today. This is Catherine Morehouse with Politico. Mm-hmm. Okay, my question might be a little bit long, but I'm going to try and keep it somewhat contained. So one point is, one case where there was disagreement between the administration and a chair was between Chatterjee and former Chairman Chatterjee and the last Trump administration over carbon pricing. I would say it's probably still not totally clear, at least to the reporters, whether his removal as chair at that point was directly related to that or related to, there were some other rumors at the time as well. But the reason I bring that up is because the DOJ has also said, not long before this, about a week ago, that they will no longer consider restrictions on the president's ability to fire independent regulators constitutional. So I guess my question is, are there concerns that combined, if there was, say a sweeping order that maybe the administration was interested in and maybe disagreed with the commission's process on, for instance, data centers, they're very interested in if they weighed in on the co-location piece, and I don't want to get too speculative here, but combined with the DOJ's memo, this executive order, do you have any concerns at all that there might be a case where the administration improperly weighs in on a proceeding, one of those sweeping proceedings like the data proceeding, and what that might mean for the commissioners, for removing them, their independence? And hopefully that's a clear question. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a lot of questions. But I know what you're, but I can pick them out. So first of all, the thing about former Commissioner Chatterjee, I got an easy answer. I wasn't here. I was state commissioner. I read about it, and I don't know what the motivation was, but that clearly illustrates that presidents have under our statute. Our organizational statute. And I didn't even mention that in listing all the FP. Our organizational statute is called the Department of Energy Organization Act, DOE Organization Act, and that's our foundational statute, and it gives the president the authority to name a chair and to remove a chair, and there's no Senate confirmation or unconfirmation. And so that power obviously indicates that the president has the prerogative to have a chair that the president thinks is going to basically generally pursue the overall policies. I don't think presidents wanting to get into so much detail about, again, I mentioned like the hundreds of 205s we have. But I think that example, the legal authority is there. There's no question that legal authority is there. Okay, so clearly the intent of that kind of authority of Congress did that. Okay, that wasn't from an EO. Congress gave the president the authority to name the chair and get rid of the chair. And they can do it with an email. Okay, it doesn't require much paperwork. So that authority is there. So that interaction is obviously built into the relationship. The other thing you asked about, I think, is the Humphreys executor case. You asked about Humphreys executor, and that is the position taken by the acting Solicitor General that they're not going to defend Humphreys executor. Humphreys executor was a case from almost 100 years ago, which, okay, point number one, this issue's been around for a long time, where President Franklin Roosevelt fired a commissioner on the Federal Trade Commission and sent a letter saying, first, it's interesting history. First, he sent a letter saying, would you please step down voluntarily? And the commissioner says, no, I won't. So then Roosevelt sends a letter and says, well, you're fired. And the commissioner named Humphrey sued for his back pay and then died 4 months after he stepped down, it was fired. And so the whole case became, the reason it's called Humphrey's executor is because his executor brought the case to get the back pay. So the holding in the Supreme Court was a president cannot fire a member of a multi-member commission without these specified causes. So what you're asking about, Catherine, is that Acting Solicitor General says we're not going to defend challenges to statutes that say the president can only fire any commissioners for cause, and that's their prerogative to take that position. And I will say this: the only lawyers who are in court today, as we speak, who are arguing that the president should have the power to fire FERC commissioners is a former FERC commissioner and a former Solicitor General for President Clinton. They're the only lawyers I know who are in court today as we speak in the Middle District of North Carolina arguing that the president should have the ability to fire FERC commissioners at will. That's the only case I know of. And it'll play itself out. And if you want to read the complaint, I've got the complaint right here. I've read it quite a bit. So that issue is going to be litigated. The Humphreys executor issue is going to be litigated. I think there's probably a lot of other test cases where it's going to be litigated on the Supreme Court. And it's up to the Supreme Court to determine whether to overturn Humphreys executor. It's not up to us. I hope that was your question.
Well, the data center piece.
Data center.
Sorry, the part of the question was I guess do those things combined give you any concern? I mean, part of what you said was the unknown was how they essentially plan to carry out the pieces that carry out FERC's ability to comply with some of these laws, and that includes.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, I'm wondering in terms of, it sounds like there's still an opening for them to possibly weigh in on these sweeping decisions. You say that's the target.
That's a good point. I know what you're asking. First of all, does the president or the secretary of energy or anybody else in the administration have the authority to weigh in on a FERC case? And the answer is yes, of course. They can file comment in the case. In the last 4 years, I've seen numerous examples where the Biden administration, EPA, would regularly file comment in our proceedings, in the CPCN proceedings, regularly file comment in the proceedings. So an administration can do that. The Secretary of, under our own DOE Organization Act, the Secretary of Energy and the Department of Energy have every authority to file a position in any of our proceedings that they want to. The point I was making earlier was they can weigh in. The administration can weigh in through any. It can be the Secretary of Energy. It can be the Secretary of Interior, Secretary of Defense. It can be EPA, OMB. They can weigh in, but it has to be in the record. When you're talking about a case like a 203, let's say, or any of them, 203, 205, 206. The data center case we did today is going to be a 206. Okay, the one we initiated. The administration can weigh into those cases, but under our statutory rules of ex parte communications, it has to be on the record. It has to be part of the record. It can't be, a phone call saying, I want you to do this or I want you to do that. Yeah, Maya. Did that answer? Did that get you? Okay.
Hi, thanks. Maya Weber, S&P Global Platts. Okay, more on that executive order. There's a provision in there that says employees of FERC have to align with the legal opinions of the White House or the Attorney General. And I'm just wondering how you see that fitting in. To give an example of, say, the White House has a position on a rule that it would like FERC to adopt. Does that mean that you or the other commissioners cannot have a different legal interpretation? And then just more broadly, are you essentially saying you're not too concerned about this executive order and the potential for the White House to try to infringe on FERC's kind of autonomy in making decisions?
What I'm saying is, point number one, a lot of this is past practice that's been put in under one wrapper. I want to get details on the part that doesn't appear to be past practice. Like, does this contemplate a role in proceedings outside of our ex parte rules? And that's where we'll seek clarification. You raised a good question about the part about who sets the legal opinion. And every 205 we do, every 206 we do, we obviously put a legal reasoning for what we do. I don't think this in any way, shape, or form. I don't think DOJ wants 1,000 new cases of telling us a legal opinion in every 205, every 206. I don't think that's at all what's intended, because I don't think they want 1,000 new cases. But every order we do, we give a legal opinion. I think what that's aimed at is, again, and by the way, let's get on the question of past practice. I've talked to former general counsels of FERC. FERC historically, whenever we're appealed in court, whenever one of our orders is appealed, seeks and coordinates with the Department of Justice before taking a legal opinion. Most of the time, historically, what I've been told is DOJ says, thanks, you do it, because we got enough work of our own. But the practice of coordinating or at least consulting with DOJ on an appeal where you're going into federal court, which might raise a legal issue, is a practice that goes back a long, long time. And again, most of the time DOJ says we don't want any part of that. We don't have time, and so it leaves it up to us. So, and again, I don't think that, for example, we get appealed on certificate cases, Section 3, Section 7 cases. We get appealed all the time. Every single one is going to be appealed if we grant the certificate. That's been the practice. I don't think that DOJ wants to come in and get and we defend our opinion. So I don't think that's what's intended by this. I don't think DOJ wants to come in on every single one of our garden variety cases and say we'll give you the legal position. Presumably, I just don't think that's what's intended. I think it's on big, like if we're going to go to Supreme Court, or someone wants to take us to the Supreme Court, I think DOJ definitely wants to say, we'll decide, if you're arguing a constitutional issue like Humphrey's executor, that will be for a decision for DOJ, not for us to make an opinion on Humphrey's executor. I think that's what it's intended for.
Okay.
And that's been past practice, by the way. We don't take cases to the Supreme Court. Historically, if a case is going to go to the Supreme Court, DOJ handles it, not FERC. That's never been the case.
And so you don't think that would apply to the opinions or statements of the various commissioners? I mean, if there, say you have a rule that you're acting on and some of the commissioners may be dissenting. I mean, the way this is written, I mean, would this impinge on their ability to express their legal views?
Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, I dissented on 1920. I don't think if this say, I don't see that as like telling commissioners, like if you go retroactively and say, okay, Christie descended on 1920, would he have been what? Let's say an EO like this had been in place, would he have been arrested? I mean, I don't know. I don't see it applying to people's dissents at all.
Okay.
Again, I think I want to get more detail as we go forward, and we'll just keep going forward, and we will apply the statutes that we typically apply. I don't see it that way. I think it's for big deal cases that are going to end up going to SCOTUS, Supreme Court, where there's a big legal issue, usually a constitutional issue that's at issue. Of course the DOJ wants to know, but they always have. They always have. We tried to get them to appeal Sable. I'm told by a former general counsel when Sable Trail came down, FERC wanted DOJ to appeal to the Supreme Court, and DOJ said, no, we don't have time or money, resources. So it's always been their ultimate call when you talk about big cases like that. Yeah. Does that take care of it? Okay. George?
Hi, once again, just wanted to reiterate what everyone said. Congratulations on the new role, and thank you so much for taking our questions. I kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit. I know the U.S. Office of Personnel Management gave voluntary guidance to agencies last week, directing them, saying that they could terminate probationary employees. I was just curious if any probationary employees had been laid off or let go from FERC, and if so, how many, or if there are any further plans for a reduction in force in coordination with some of the president's earlier executive orders.
The number of probationary employees who've been laid off is 0.
Daniel Moore with Axios. Given what you were saying about coordinating with the White House on policy matters, I mean, have you been coordinating with the Trump White House on data center co-location issues, and how has that been informing, if so?
No. I had a very nice introductory lunch meeting with 2 cabinet secretaries, Energy and Interior, and talked about the same things I've been talking about for 4 years, which is reliability and getting infrastructure built, but no specific cases, certainly. It's just
do you plan to, or is that something you plan to do going forward, given the executive order and what you were saying about coordinating with?
Well, I hope so. If they want to hear from me, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I hope they do, because there's absolutely nothing inappropriate with talking about general issues of energy. I mean, again, that's been, as AJ's story, Rich Glick talked regularly and appropriately. I mean, really, FERC doesn't live in a parallel universe. Some people seem to imply that FERC lives in some parallel universe where there's no such thing as an administration and FERC just goes about its life, without anybody being affected. The DOE Organization Act puts us within the Department of Energy. Within the Department of Energy. So I would hope they would want to hear from me. I would hope so. Not in an inappropriate way, not in the in a way that violates the ex parte rules. I'm not going to do that. I've been doing this business for a long time. I've been in this business for a long time as a lawyer and as a state commissioner, and I know how important ex parte rules are. I'm not going to violate ex parte rules. You don't talk about pending. You don't talk about contested cases. You do not. And I don't think anybody of my predecessors has. But talking about general issues of like the need to build generation, the need to build infrastructure, transmission, pipelines, totally appropriate. Totally appropriate. A lot of people don't know what we do. A lot of people don't know what we do. They don't know how these energy markets work. They don't know how the capacity markets work. I think a lot of people run the capacity markets don't know how they work. But that's my opinion. But, you know, what we do over here is extraordinarily technical. Extraordinarily technical. When you get into, just look at the cases we've had recently on the capacity markets. It's not bedtime reading. And I mean, unless you want to go to sleep. This is very technical stuff, and I like to explain to people outside what we do, including people in the administration who want to know. I hope they want to know. I hope they're interested in what we do, because I'm happy to tell them. Yeah, AJ.
Thank you, Chairman Christie. I think you actually owe me a couple of nickels in royalties for referencing my article twice now.
Okay.
Jesting aside, I want to draw your attention to Section 7 of the Executive Order in particular, where the language is the President and the Attorney General shall provide authoritative interpretations of law for the executive branch. I spoke to two of your predecessors, John Wellinghoff and Joe Kelleher, and their concern with that is, as you mentioned, this doesn't necessarily say the law will be violated, but it gives an extraordinarily broad authority by the plain meaning of this executive order to the President and the Attorney General to interpret what the law is. And their concern is, as John Wellinghoff put it, that if we were to see a situation like in 2017 where the Energy Secretary asks FERC to adopt something, FERC might not have the option if assuming that the President issued a legal opinion on it, or if a court issued an order telling FERC to reverse a decision or go back to the drawing board on something, and the White House's opinion did not change, FERC would be caught between a rock and a hard place, between violating either the executive order or the court order. And I'm curious what your interpretation of this would be and how you're going to proceed going forward.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's a good point. And it comes under the second point I was making, which is the devil's in the details, is how does this play out in individual cases. What those two guys are referring to was the regulation which came over here from DOE, I think it was in 2017, and then FERC ultimately chose not to adopt it. Which, by the way, and I wasn't here, I was a state regulator, but I read about it, but it was perfectly legal and perfectly appropriate, and it still is, hadn't been changed, for DOE to propose a regulation to FERC. That's in the DOE Organization Act. Read it. It is perfectly legal and appropriate for the Secretary of Energy to propose a regulation to FERC. And it is perfectly appropriate for FERC to consult with the Secretary, but once it's filed and it becomes a contested proceeding, it all has to be on the record, so they can certainly file their legal opinion. And if it's filed under 205, then FERC ultimately is going to take a vote under 205. The Secretary's position is going to be known. I mean, the DOE Organization Act contemplates that because they're going to file an opinion. So that is already built into the DOE Organization Act. They can file a regulation, and they can and FERC acts on it or not. What's built into the regulation is FERC decides, does it, as it did in that case. So, I think on the legal opinion, you pick out a good section, and I read that closely too, is, again, it's, in constitutional law, we have a thing where we talk about, are we analyzing it, and you're a law student. It's amazing, by the way, this guy's a law student and still does this. I mean, I wouldn't have time to do that. But you analyze a constitutional issue on two levels. You either do it on its face, prima facie, or you do it as applied. And the Supreme Court has through many, many cases on Kong law, has sometimes evaluated the law on its face, sometimes evaluated the law how it was applied. And I take this to be the same thing. We will see how it's going to be applied and find out whether or not it can't violate our ex parte rules. I mean, we're not going to have a situation where somebody outside of the record says to do something and that's not even on the record.
I appreciate your comments about the intent as well that you highlighted at the beginning, and I think it is clear that we could still use some additional details on that intent from the White House. But to press you on this, if there is a situation where the White House provides an official opinion or the Attorney General provides an official opinion that you believe is flagrantly contradictory to the interpretation of the Supreme Court, such as this Humphreys executive letter, so Attorney General says that is bad law. Supreme Court says it's good law as recently as 2020 with Scalia, although they modified it a bit. Mm-hmm. If you reach that situation, how are you going to proceed in the interim?
That is just too hypothetical, and we don't have a set of facts in that case. We really don't. I mean, but you sort of jumped to Humphrey's executor. They're saying they won't defend Humphrey's executor. The Supreme Court's the ones who have to decide whether to overturn it. And it's, FERC's not going to be taking a position on Humphrey's executor. That's going to be way above our pay grade. That's a constitutional case. That's going to be above our pay grade. So that's not going to be a scenario that even happens. Now, if it's a Federal Power Act and we say Federal Power Act says this, the Secretary says, well, no, it doesn't. I want to see if there's some opinion that comes in and says 205 means something different than what you've always said it meant, then I want to see the reasoning. We may say, we don't agree. But I don't think they're going to be wading into 205s. I mean, seriously, that is such eyes glaze over stuff. I just don't think that that's what they have in mind. I think they're talking about big stuff like, we're not going to take a position on Humphrey's executor contrary to what DOJ takes, and we don't want to. That's way above our pay grade. We're not going to wade in on Humphrey's executor. Again, the only lawyers doing that, I named them, are in court right now saying FERC commissioners should be fired at will. Yeah, Noreen.
Working. Okay. Just to follow up to Jordan's question, given the mass culling that's happening in the federal government, are you worried about FERC staff being culled? Has the Department of, or the Department of Efficiency, government of DOGE, I guess, have they come around? Have they called? What's happening on that front? And how many probationary employees do you have?
I don't know the number of probationary, give it off the top of my head, but I know that no one has been terminated. I'm not sure the exact number, but no one's been terminated. What we do on probationary is we follow the way it's supposed to be, which is probationary period is where you judge an employee. It's part of the job application, and probationary employees, if they're high performers, that's what you want to determine, and if they're not cutting it, you determine that too. But that's just part of good management. But no one's been terminated. No one's been terminated. You asked about something else.
If you'd been contacted by DOGE,
No.
or if they've come by.
No,
at
we
all.
provide information to OMB all the time. And here's the thing about FERC, which I think is important. Number one, we don't add a dollar to the deficit. We hold taxpayers harmless. Every dollar we spend it comes from fees from regulated industries. We don't get a single dollar from taxpayers. So we are deficit neutral, okay, number one. Number two, we don't make grants. You've been reading about all these grants that have been stopped, from EPA. We don't make grants. None, zero. So what we do is the money we spend, again, it doesn't come from taxpayers. It comes from regulated industries, and we only spend it on our direct operations to do the functions that we are statutorily required to do under the Federal Power Act, Natural Gas Act. So we're very lean, and our money goes to the purpose of why we're here, which is to administer the Federal Power Act and the Natural Gas Act. That's what we do.
And just a very quick follow-up. Has the administration's stance on DEI affected anything internally or what you're making presentable in documents or on the website in any way?
No, we hire on merit. We hire without discrimination. We value every employee without regard to ethnic orientation, sexual orientation. We hire on merit. We value the individual. We have great individuals, and we hire, we advance, we promote based on the individual's abilities, which is the way it ought to be. Yeah, Tom.
Thanks, Tom Tiernan with the Energy Daily. I want to drill down a little bit on your comments on the executive order. I want to make sure that so you're comfortable beforehand, before issuing a major policy statement or a major rule, that you're comfortable going to the White House or the OMB or DOJ, and I'll give an example of the resource adequacy announcement today. Assuming there's some kind of policy statement or something where FERC wants to do this, you're comfortable going to the White House and those administration agencies before issuing anything and getting their input and having them give some kind of guidance?
We certainly didn't seek permission to do a technical conference on resource adequacy. And I don't think there's anything in the resource adequacy technical conference that would be in any way, shape, or form contrary to anything that this administration, is promoting. I mean, resource adequacy. I mean, that's generation. It's infrastructure. So there wasn't any reason to go to the White House on doing a technical conference on resource adequacy. One thing that's undefined, and I'm going to seek detailed response, is the EO talks about regulatory actions, which is a sort of nebulous term. I think we need more detail about what are actions. I mean, I think the thing is really about big deal regulations. Regulations are legislative. Regulations, I've always said in teaching it's regulatory law, that regulations are simply laws by another name. So of course they're going to want to know that when any agency is issuing laws and just calling it a regulation, there's going to want to be some explanation and coordination about what are you doing. But the term actions, I certainly don't think it extends to something like a technical conference, and certainly not on resource adequacy. But I would like to know more detail about what do you mean by actions? How far does that go?
Okay, and quick follow-up on that resource adequacy announcement. FERC traditionally holds an annual reliability conference, grid reliability. I haven't read the details at this point, but this is something separate. This is not, I understand resource adequacy is dealing with grid reliability, but this is separate and apart from the annual grid reliability session that is held.
Yeah, I think that's in the fall, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
This technical conference is spurred by several factors. One, as we all know, we're looking at load forecasts that are just astronomical compared to anything I ever saw as a state regulator, driven by the data center explosion. We also know that we're not generating capacity anywhere near at the pace we need to. And specifically, so that's the big picture. And by the way, did you ask the White House? They're all for reliability and resource adequacy and building infrastructure, so I wouldn't see anything that would even be crossways on that. This is also, the reason this is focusing on the RTOs is, first of all, about 3/4 of the consumers in America by load, the load portion, are served by RTOs and ISOs, so that's the first place to look. That 3/4 of the country roughly is in an RTO. And it's no secret that we have had, over the last 3 months, numerous cases come in, 206s, 205s, related to alleged problems in the capacity markets, particularly the PJM capacity market. There is a lot of controversy percolating about that capacity market. A lot of states are concerned. Pennsylvania filed its own complaint. I'm not going to talk about the merits because it was just settled, but governors are concerned. I had a conversation with the governor of Pennsylvania, an extensive conversation about the concerns that they have about consumer cost in PJM. There is a lot of concern about what's going on in PJM, what's going on in MISO. MISO, if you look at the NERC resource reports, long-term resource adequacy, MISO is looking at a deficit of resources very close, very soon. So we got a big problem. We got a big problem in resource adequacy in the RTOs, particularly the two biggest in America are PJM and MISO. Those are the two biggest in America by load. By load, SPP might be geographically, but by load is PJM and MISO. But we're going to talk about all of them. But that's what spurs that. We've had a lot of controversy, a lot of complaints, not only complaints that come in the door as a 206, but just general controversy, a lot of letters from politicians from the PJM region, a lot of letters from state legislators, from senators, from governors. Again, Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania has been very vocal. Other governors have been vocal now in PJM. So I want to get in front of it. I don't want to be behind it. That's my goal. I always like to be in front of an issue, not behind an issue. So that's why we're going to have the technical conferences. Well, it's one conference, 2 days in June. And yes, you're right. It's separate from the other one. Because I want to drill down in detail particularly about the capacity markets. And there's a lot of fermentation about alternatives now in PJM. A lot of talk about alternatives. Yeah, James, the guy who covers PJM.
Yeah. Thanks for taking all this time with us. My question is back to the EO. Like, a common concern I heard from people was that, like, it's just another step in the ongoing politicization of FERC, and that has implications for investments and stuff. Do you share that concern? What are your thoughts there?
You know, the idea about politicization, I mean, look, we live in a democratic system, and we live in a political world in the sense of politics with a small p, Aristotelian version of politics. The danger at FERC and any regulatory agency is not that look, let's go back to 1920. Glad you mentioned that. Actually, you didn't mention it, but I brought it up. In 1920, and I cited this in my dissent, I cited a letter from Senator Schumer, Majority Leader of the Senate, who wrote us a letter and in granular detail told us exactly what we should do. And 99% of that became part of 1920. And that's political interference. But you know what? It was totally appropriate. It's fine for Senator Schumer to write us a letter, ghostwritten by lobbyists, that told us what to do, and it ended up in the rule. I cited that. You're going to have that, okay? We don't live in a parallel universe, in some pristine vacuum. And it's totally appropriate for a senator, especially a majority leader, to write us a letter and say, here's what I want to see. The bigger danger at FERC and other regulatory agencies is the danger of regulatory capture. And it's the influence of special interests. I mean, politicians are going to do what politicians do. They're going to represent their constituents. Special interests affect this process here at FERC all the time. And by which I mean lawyers and lobbyists for special interests who are looking for either rent seeking. I said in 1920, I said, if you want to see an example of regulatory capture, this is Exhibit A. And I stand by that. It's the private interest that we have got to make sure we're working for the public interest and not the private special interests.
Doesn't this potentially open up another avenue for that through the White House? Because I've heard, I talked to Commissioner Burnell yesterday, and she told me, when they tried to do standard market design, Southern Company called the White House and got them to kind of shut it down. Like, couldn't there just be more common occurrence with this? I mean,
I don't know what Southern did back during standard market design. I am very glad they got it shut down because I think it was a terrible idea. So whatever they did, I'm glad they got it shut down. Look, when I was in Virginia, no one talked to us. We had very strict rules on ex parte. We wouldn't even talk to outside interests about anything substantive because we were under judicial code of conduct, and so we didn't talk to anybody about anything other than, the weather. And at FERC, it is perfectly appropriate. I was sort of taken aback when I got here. During a rulemaking, any interest group that wants to can talk to you. Any interest group that wants to can come and lobby you. And when I first heard about that, I was like, what? And I said, oh, yes, it's the way it's been for decades. A rulemaking is not considered, it's considered a general proceeding. And any lobbyist, any lawyer that wants to, any interest group, any corporation can come and talk to you freely, privately, and that's not considered ex parte. Now, they cannot do it, and so that's nothing different, James. That's been going on for decades. That's been going on for decades. Query whether it should. The FCC's had a rule where any lobbyist or lawyer that comes and talks to you has to sign a form, and it's publicly published at the end of every month. I've actually looked into that to see whether we should do something like that. But it's been the practice at FERC for decades, is that lawyers, lobbyists get to come talk to commissioners about a rulemaking and try to lobby you on it, and they do, and they did, and it's considered, it's standard practice, and it's been going on for decades. The danger is always, and let's move to a contested proceeding. Now, in a contested proceeding, they cannot do that because ex parte communications in a contested proceeding are totally inappropriate, and that ain't going to happen, I can promise you. That ain't going to happen on my watch because ex parte communications are illegal. But it's in the proceedings where that rule applies. Again, 205, 206, 203. But in open general proceedings, we've had people coming and lobbying us for years, for decades, since way before I got here. And it's standard practice. Nothing new.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a question online?
Oh, yeah. You still out there?
Okay, we're going to go to a question online.
We could probably turn the channel.
Let's, Zach, do you still have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I guess, yeah, thanks again for doing this, Chairman. Just one more quick follow-up, specifically on the ex parte considerations around the EO. Is it possible to send draft rules to OIRA for White House review and potential kind of approval without violating FERC's ex parte rules and preserving commissioners' ability to vote?
That's the kind of detail I got to get straightened out on how is, I said you talk about evaluating something on an as applied basis. We need to get details about how that applies in a definition of matter. Okay, a definition of matter, like we do. If we do a policy statement, like we did, again, I get back to the GHG policy statement, which a majority voted for. I dissented, which was totally consistent with the Biden policy. Is that how would that have worked under this? I'd have to find that out. That's the kind of detail I want to get to.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one more question online from Chris Knight with Argus Media.
Hi, Chairman, thanks for doing this. The order says that FERC and other agencies are so-called independent agencies. It basically says that you're under the control of the White House. So do you see FERC as an independent agency, and will you act independently from the White House?
I see FERC is run by the Department of Energy Organization Act, and exactly what it said, and it uses the term independent, but it's independent according to the terms of the DOE Organization Act and our applicable statutes. So we're independent in decision making according to the terms of the DOE Organization Act, and that's what I'm going to we're going to continue to follow the applicable statutes, whether it's Federal Power Act, Natural Gas Act, all those statutes. We act under all those statutes. So follow the statute.
Great. Okay, one more. Alexis, this is the last question. Alexis in the room. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. And yeah, Alexis Weiss with Bloomberg Law. It's I've been on the job for only a few months, so it's great to finally have the opportunity to introduce myself. But
Okay.
Either way, I mean, if NEPA, in the case that NEPA does face legal challenges or proposed amendments for the sake of streamlining the permitting process, I'm just curious about how that would impact FERC's approach when it comes to its project approvals, especially when it comes to, as I know with your legacy, balancing the interests of the developer versus the needs of the surrounding communities as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she asked about NEPA. I don't see the EO having any effect whatsoever on our NEPA procedures. What we do under NEPA is, and this is when we're talking about a pipeline or an LNG under Natural Gas Act. So we're required under NEPA to determine whether, first of all, there's a major environmental impact, and if there is, we have to come up with mitigation. What FERC has historically done, and again, this gets back to why there's a lot not new here. FERC historically has followed White House guidance via the Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ, in our NEPA procedures, and we've been doing that for like 20 some years. So following CEQ guidance on NEPA has been the practice around here for quite a long time. They've changed a lot of that, and we will have to take the new guidance. And again, it's voluntary. We've always followed it voluntarily. What we don't have the choice to follow is NEPA. We have to follow it, and we have to meet those statutory requirements, and we'll continue to do it. And part of the process when you do an environmental impact is you look at the impact on communities that are affected by an infrastructure project. And so we will certainly continue to do that and focus on all the impacted communities. I guess you're asking about the impact on people around the pipeline side.
Yes, but I'm concerned about just the legal applicability of NEPA if it does face legal challenges, because then I feel like you might have to wait for a decision or things of that sort.
NEPA, I mean, no one, in my opinion, has challenged the constitutionality of NEPA. I mean, there's no pending cases that I'm aware of where somebody's saying NEPA is not constitutional. There's been efforts in Congress to change NEPA, to amend it. Thus far, they haven't changed it. So we follow it. It's just like, I can't emphasize this enough. We follow the statutes that apply to individual cases. If NEPA applies in a case, we follow it. We're going to follow it. No one's going to tell us not to follow the law, because NEPA applies. I mean, NEPA is very controversial. There's a lot of people that like to cut it back, change it, amend it, but that's, amending NEPA is up to Congress. We don't. That's above our pay grade. We follow NEPA. Yeah. Now that isn't affected by the EO. We follow NEPA. Of course we do.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chairman.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.